I've recently joined Buffer as their head of strategic partnerships. And prior to that, I was working at a little company called Shopify, where I led our international growth team for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, which was completely remote. Before that, I was working as the head of events and marketing for a co-initiative started by the Next Web, which I'm sure the majority of you on this call will know, and Google for Startups called TQ. I also do a lot of stuff in the digital space. I studied web development and graphic design, and I started one of the largest women in tech meetups and / communities in the Netherlands. So I feel very at home speaking to you today. So hopefully this isn't your first introduction to Buffer, especially if you work in the digital space, but in case it is, I wanted to give you a very brief overview of what we do. At a very high level, we're committed to creating content our business customers will find valuable. And you're probably thinking to yourself, what does that actually mean? Well, we're a social media optimization tool to help our customers and direct-to-consumer brands schedule content, engage with their customer base, and analyze their impact and reach. And why have we been asked to speak today? Buffer is seen as a pioneer in remote work. We publish a lot of content in this space, so please check out our blog afterwards if you want more info. And we're very transparent with a lot of our successes and failures, some of which I'll be sharing with you all today. So remote work has been the norm at Buffer for many years now. We ditched our office. We had a very small office in San Francisco, but we've actually been hiring remote teams for nearly a decade. We now have 85 teammates spread across 10 different time zones. Over the years, our team has experimented and learned tons about productivity, tools, collaborating, communication, and disconnecting, and how they each relate to remote work. So I'm very happy to be digging into some of this a little bit today. So I just want to preface this talk by saying remote work under normal circumstances is very different from remote work under COVID-19. This is also a very challenging time for our team members as well, even those who have been working remote for nearly a decade. We need to consider that for many people, it's their first time working at home with a significant other or a roommate also being at home. Many folks who work at Buffer also have to entertain and teach their kids during the day. And many of us live in countries where you aren't allowed to leave the house without a note from the government. So all of these circumstances make for a much more challenging environment than would otherwise be a traditional working from home or remote setup. So that brings me to lesson number 1, to be more forgiving and understanding of your colleagues during this time. Allow them to work irregular hours to help out their families. Understand that deadlines may need to be pushed back. It's really important for employees to maintain some sort of normalcy in their life, despite a global pandemic happening outside. And at the end of the day, their health and their families must come first. So let's dive into communication and collaboration. Oops. So communication and collaboration are very complex issues, especially for remote workers. Over the last 3 years, we produced a State of Remote Work report, and every year communication and collaboration have been one of the top struggles for remote workers. So this is a very important component of remote work. The big difference that I notice at Buffer versus many other companies is that we really lean into asynchronous communication quite a bit. This concept simply means that work doesn't happen at the same time for everyone, and acknowledging that concept. Ensuring good asynchronous communication practices is one of the ways that we address this struggle at Buffer. Asynchronous communication can be a big asset for remote teams for many reasons, but especially if you have teammates in multiple time zones. We want to make sure that no one is excluded from important discussions and collaboration because of where they live or the circumstances they might have at home. So instead of relying on everyone being online at the same time, we try our best to communicate in a way that keeps conversations and decision-making open to all teammates, no matter where they are. As a distributed team across many countries, we use a number of tools to help us communicate effectively at Buffer. Over the past year, Threads has become a staple for us when it comes to effective asynchronous communication and collaboration. It has a clear purpose to make it easy to have text-based conversations across the company and to clearly mark when decisions are being made. We don't have very many meetings at Buffer, which I'm personally a big fan of, so we can really focus on getting our work done, and Threads helps us remove a lot of the noise from other channels. At my previous company, as I mentioned, I managed a remote team for a company that was not remote. And I would wake up sometimes to hundreds of notifications on Slack. There was literally a Slack channel for every product pivot or every decision that was being made. And it was very difficult to find the important information. At Buffer, Slack is much more reserved for casual conversations, while Threads is the tool which you collect feedback and where decisions are being made. I also used to have 9 hours of meetings back to back every Monday alone. So I find that meetings are quite disruptive to productivity. So do as much as you can asynchronously. I would highly, highly recommend it. We also had a chance to catch up with the founder of Threads and ask him for some insight on how to get the most out of his product and asynchronous communication in general. So firstly, clear processes and clear intentions. Communication stress grows exponentially the larger or more distributed you are. Sorry. With that, it's significantly easier to miscommunicate or misinterpret. It's important to create clear processes with clear intentions, which will reduce the amount of additional stress that you feel internally. Secondly, most things are not urgent. Knowing the difference between urgent communication and important communication is very crucial. Urgent communication will always be a fixture within the workplace, and products like Slack are a great fit for it. However, the more remote you become, the more you need to lean into thoughtful communication. Most things are not urgent, but making them seem so will add a higher amount of anxiety, particularly to people who were originally co-located. Third, we would recommend investing in your writing. It's harder to be misunderstood while you write. It gives people time to think and read about what you said versus react immediately. It's preserved for future generations of employees. It forces principled thinking, and it will reduce the back and forth. Taking time to write your thoughts will refine them as they get jotted down, provide more context to others, catch people up to speed quicker, avoiding the need for a bunch of independent one-on-one meetings. And this is exactly why we lean so heavily on asynchronous communication at Buffer as well. Finally, I'll add one of Buffer's best practices here, which we've honed in over time as a team. Communicate everything up front. It's easy and natural in an office to walk up to a colleague and have a quick hello before asking them a question. Online, it makes much more sense to communicate everything efficiently from the start and not leave a hello message dangling in time and space before relaying the rest of your message. So go ahead and give all the information upfront at once, defaulting to the idea that your teammate may not be replying at the same time as you. And from working in the Netherlands for 8 years, I feel like the direct and upfront approach is very much appreciated as well in this work culture. So please feel free to lean into that a little bit more. So although we prioritize asynchronous communication at Buffer, that doesn't mean we never have meetings or real-time communication. So how do you know when the situation calls for what kind of communication? For our team, we tend to use real-time communication for casual hangouts or catch-ups or celebrations, urgent situations, or relationship building, such as one-on-ones or masterminds, things like that. But even in the best circumstances, real-time meetings can create communication that isn't as inclusive as we would like. It can be difficult for the full team to participate and feel heard. If one person dominates the conversation, it's harder for others to jump in. And if you aren't online or available for a real-time discussion, you're going to feel left out, and the team will miss out on the context and insight that you could have provided. So yet another benefit of asynchronous communication is that it's more inclusive, both in the time zone that a teammate might be living in and the way that they prefer to communicate. It gives everyone a chance to reflect before they can speak and communicate in the same way. It's not only just for remote work. Even if you were completely co-located as a company, you'd be surprised to learn how many people feel like they are just as unheard as someone in a completely different time zone. So my second lesson would be to really lean into asynchronous communication, as it will help build trust within your team and allow you to get things done quicker. So I'm not going to go into every tool, that we use, since we only have 20 minutes, but Slack is one that the majority of us will be familiar with. As I mentioned earlier, I suffered from major Slack fatigue at my last company, and I think many of us have. So Buffer actually introduced 10 Slack principles to help optimize our use of this tool. So let me preface this a little bit. We do want to use Slack to communicate effectively and have fun as a team, but what we don't want to do is have teammates constantly monitor Slack after work hours or get pinged at any hour of the day or night. So for us, Slack is the right place for social conversations, interesting links, chit chat, questions or requests that need a faster / same day response, real-time conversations with those in the same time zone as you, and async conversations with those outside of your time zone, sharing some quick praise, gratitude, achievements, passing along non-urgent need-to-knows, or often prefaced by NRN or no reply necessary. And we find that Slack is not the best place for high-level discussions, making big decisions, or giving in-depth feedback. So the first point that we like to lean in on is that it's to be responsible for managing your own downtime. It's important that people can talk to each other when the recipient is not around. If we're each responsible for our own downtime, i.e. setting up your do not disturb when you're offline or not working or in the zone, controlling notifications on your phone if you choose to install Slack there, we will give the rest of the team full freedom to communicate as they like. It's your responsibility to then deal with the messages when you're ready. So a tip here is to mark unread or star or click remind me for any of the items that you need to take action on so you don't forget. Secondly, we default to public channels. So when in doubt, we always post a message where everyone can read it. Keep everyone updated on the stuff that's not private. Third, we use status and profile to communicate availability. So share your status to let folks know when you're out sick or on vacation or just deep in a focus period. Additionally, Buffer's Slack profiles include a lot of great information like time zone, typical sign-on and sign-off times, and Calendly links. So make sure yours is filled out to help other folks in your team understand how to best communicate with you, and check others teammates of yours as well to see how you can best work with them. So being deliberate about your notifications. So we recommend that keep Slack's recommended notification settings. So that's only for direct messages or when someone @s you or specific highlighted words. These settings eliminate worry about missing out on important information without your phone or computer going off all day with less important conversations. Fifth, communicate proactively. When you ping someone, go ahead and give that person all the context they need in order to get back to you when they can. So for example, no need to message, "Hi Joel," and then wait to receive a reply before saying more. So try to include links, docs, your deadline or desired response time, anything that can move along the conversation forward asynchronously. Try to thread when you can. When you're having a discussion with many people at once, things can get a little confusing. The ideas and opinions can get lost in the shuffle. Using threads when you can helps all of us keep up with the conversations we need to follow. Kill or modify Slack when you need to focus, which doesn't necessarily mean quitting it. You can set yourself to away or activate do not disturb or set a status to a focus mode when you want to focus on getting something done without being interrupted. Don't keep checking Slack messages constantly. Having unread messages on Slack doesn't mean you have to read them immediately. People can get really lost in kind of the rabbit hole here. Let people get on with their work while you get on with yours. Save message checking for when you are out of your focus zone. So there's often a lot of confusion too between @channel versus @here. So including @channel in a message will notify everyone in the chat room, but using @here will notify only the people who happen to be online at that moment. So for non-urgent announcements, @here is always best. Use @channel and @everyone for emergencies only. It sends push and email notifications to everyone, including people who may be offline or on vacation. And lastly, we try to follow the principle to reply by the end of your day. So how fast should you expect a reply to a question or request that you made of a teammate on Slack? You can expect a reply by the end of their normal workday, assuming that you've reached out to a teammate specifically by adding them or sending them a direct message. You didn't share a specific deadline, always do when you can. and they're working a regular workday. So check their status on Slack and their Google Calendar. Those are always great ways to determine that. So lesson number 3 is to set boundaries and expectations from your comms tools. When everyone knows what is the intended purpose, it's much easier to be productive and find the right information. So moving on to some key tools that we use. So we use a lot of tools at Buffer, but these are some of the highlights. Due to time constraints, I won't get into everything. You already know Zoom. We're using it here today. Clearly the biggest celebrity to come out of COVID-19. Buffer used Zoom extensively before the pandemic, as did Shopify. And the reason it was our tool of choice at Shopify is because you can have a high number of people on the call, but have everyone appear in equal sized windows, which was important for team meetings and town halls in order to flatten any hierarchy. Notion may be a new one for you on this list. So think of it as a place where you can store your employee handbook or any evergreen documents that you aren't likely to change that often. Zenefits is where we have all of our employee benefits laid out. I will talk about some of the benefits in the next slide that you should maybe think about implementing. Okta and 1Password are pretty straightforward. Timetastic is a tool that allows us to see who is taking off time and when. So it's also a very transparent way to manage team availability. Culture Amp is a tool that we use to facilitate our internal employee surveys. Hey Taco, I will talk about on a future slide as well. And Calendly, Trello, and Dropbox are also quite straightforward, but if you have any questions about these tools, I'm happy to dig in a little bit deeper during the Q&A. So I wanted to talk about my favorite Slack integrations. I think this is a really great way to kind of optimize your Slack communications, since this is a tool that a lot of folks will be leaning on during this time. So Hey Taco is a tool that we use to give gratitude. It's very easy. If you want to say thanks to somebody for helping you out with someone, you simply add a taco next to their name on a public channel on Slack. Hey Taco keeps a tally of all these tacos, and employees can redeem them for some swag after they've reached a certain amount. It's also a great way for your team to stay connected outside of the office. So having managed a remote product team that spanned multiple time zones at Shopify, Geekbot was an easy way to communicate team goals to a wider company audience and really lean into transparency. I really cannot talk enough about how much I love this tool. Every Monday morning, my team would get a ping from Geekbot and they would answer questions such as, what is your main focus this week? Do you have any partnership updates? Is your country shipping any new features this week? What data insights have you gathered from the last week? Are you blocked on anything? Anything else you'd like to share with the team? It's meant to be a high-level snapshot or a stand-up of what your team is working on so that other folks from different product lines or disciplines can jump in and ask questions or simply just stay informed. And lastly, a tool that I used extensively at Shopify as well was called Fellow. It would help me manage all of my one-on-ones with my direct reports, but also with my leads. I would fill this out before every meeting and my direct reports would do the same. It's important to always have an agenda of talking points before every meeting, so this allows you to track progress and action items rather seamlessly. So lesson number 4, in short, there are a lot of tools out there, so don't be afraid to experiment with a small group or team before rolling it out to a larger audience. Test and iterate until you find something which works for you. So I quickly wanted to touch base on some perks that can help your employees during this time. So Modern Health is a tool which we offer Buffer employees. This can be seen as sort of a one-stop shop for mental health resources. Buffer also pays for a few coaching sessions as well, so that employees can use this resource whenever needed. So giving your employees a stipend to get started as a remote employee. Now, not every company has $1,000 per employee to devote to this, but even having a fund where they can maybe apply to get some expenses covered will help your employees become more productive. Buffer also offers a $500 startup allowance, and I personally purchased a mouse, a laptop stand, Bluetooth keyboard, and noise canceling headphones, which helps me block out my partner who's working behind me to become more productive and focus on my work. And lastly, many companies have in-office perks, so free lunch, beers with the team on Friday for a framebo, company parties, etc. We know, because we don't have that in-person element, a cool perk that Buffer offers is the gift of knowledge. So we can expense all books to Buffer. They even give us a Kindle when we start. I think this is a great way to show gratitude to your employees while also giving them a gift that could pay off in dividends to your company. So that brings me to my last point. Now is a very vulnerable time for everyone. So try to ensure that your employees feel valued during this time. It doesn't have to cost money. Have casual hangouts online where people can just drop in and feel connected to the team, allowing for flexible schedules for your team members, or integrating a system like Hey Taco to express gratitude. All of these things can be implemented to help your organization thrive during a time of uncertainty. So with that, just wanted to say thank you, and happy to take some of your questions during the Q&A.
Right. Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you very much. It's a lot, and a lot of tools, and especially a lot of thinking that has been going on. And so while you were talking, I was thinking about, you just started at Buffer. How long does it take to get used to all this thinking and knowing what the rules are in the company?
I think it can take a little bit of time to get used to everything. A lot of these tools I had kind of used in some capacity before managing a remote team. So it wasn't my first time using Slack or Zoom or any of these functionalities, but I think having like an employee resource manual like Notion, for example, where you can list all of these different tools and how they work, and maybe there's someone who's in IT who can also do some little training videos to get people up to speed. I think there are a lot of different resources that you can communicate to employees to get them up to speed. So making sure that you're transparent with some of these onboarding materials, because there are a lot of different tools out there that you can use. But I think testing and iterating first before you roll them out to all employees will help also lessen the confusion of using multiple tools at the same time. So really making sure that it works for your organization before you widely disperse it, I think is also very important. But having those evergreen documents and tutorials, and I think those are also really great assets to have during these times as well.
And do you feel yourself that you know all the rules and the norms in Buffer?
It takes some time. So for me, Threads was a completely new tool. So I was quite nervous to post in Threads for the first time. Like, I thought to myself, is what I'm going to say important enough to be discussed on a public channel? But with, because it seems like a very important decision-making channel. Like, I thought, should this be reserved for, really high-level strategic conversations? But I think it's just getting into the habit of posting, and really the more you use these tools, the better, the more comfortable you feel. So within my first week, I had never used Hey Taco before. I was giving out tacos like it was the world was ending or something, but I was really like leaning into that. So I really tried to go head first into really trying out all the tools and using them extensively, so that I could kind of find my way and find what works for me as well.
Mm-hmm. So, well, you make me think a lot, and that's a very good sign, because it's obvious. No, it's obviously not only about the tools, but especially the way you handle it, or what you just said about Threads and Taco. That, okay, it's very nice in the beginning. You think, okay, this is a function, but it has a place in the whole puzzle. So yeah, it makes me think a lot. And one of the most difficult things in any company or in any team is, we don't understand each other very well, or we have a conflict. How do you deal with that in such a difficult situation?
Yeah, so it's, in some cases, I find conflict online or over Slack can be like misinterpreted rather easily, because sometimes people can't gather the context or the tone of how things are supposed to be communicated. So I think just having a bit of an understanding, or leaning into like employee, like at Buffer, for example, we have all of us have taken like personality tests. So we know what kind of communication people prefer, what kind of medium they like, whether they prefer asynchronous written communication, or rather if they'd rather have feedback face-to-face on a call. So kind of, having that knowledge, especially with your close team members, of how their work style is, I think will definitely help in terms of easing conflict within a team. But of course, conflict still does happen, and there are a lot of mediation resources as well that are out there. So I think just also during this time to be as empathetic and understanding of your colleagues, I think is incredibly important, because not everyone will be able to be 100% every single day. There are a lot of distractions currently, so just trying to be more forgiving during this time as well, I think will also put in a lot of context for these conflicts during this time as well.
Okay, so that's a good idea. Just a quick question that somebody asked. Do you know alternatives to Slack? I think you already mentioned Threads as a tool. Are there others?
Yeah,
Like?
so Discord is one that I personally haven't used, but I know a lot of other folks who have used it. And also Microsoft Teams is one that a lot of less startups use. More typical traditional companies tend to use Microsoft Teams since they have the Microsoft tech stack. So I think those are the most popular ones, but I can't personally speak to whether or not they're great tools. I haven't personally used them, but I know that there's at least some variety out there. And I have a lot of friends in engineering and law who are using Microsoft Teams. So yeah.
Okay, cool. I've got, I think, time for 2 more questions. Questions: how do you manage to keep up with all the different apps in daily use and to keep the purpose clear to all colleagues? I notice that in time the purpose becomes less clear and the conversation is all over the place.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I really time block myself with tools like Slack. I will only check Slack during certain periods throughout my day, over lunch, at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day. But I have certain blocks that I don't look at Slack at all, and I think that really helps with focusing on getting stuff done and not being distracted with like all this noise that's happening internally. But yeah, it is quite difficult to steer the conversation, but at the same time, Threads is really reserved for one type of communication. Slack is reserved for a different type of communication. So, just maybe nudging your colleagues and saying, hey, maybe we should take this on Threads. It sounds like this is going to be a larger discussion. Let's take it to a different medium. I think just suggesting it until it becomes a habit or a new routine, I think would be a great step forward in these situations. But we try to make sure that each tool does something different. We don't, Hey Taco, for example, is something that's specifically just to boost team morale and express gratitude. We don't want to have multiple tools that ultimately do the same thing. So Slack and also Slack messages get deleted after a few days. It depends on what plan you have. So if you really want to have like long-standing conversations, that Slack isn't going to be the tool for you. So you want to have those differentiations in your different types of communication tools.
Okay. So our final question, because of time and of your voice, of course. Hi, Amanda, how do you schedule your day? Is that similar to a normal office day, or do you schedule your time differently during the day? Do you have tips, maybe?
Yeah, so my day, so I work with partners that are mostly located on the West Coast of America. So like not probably the hardest time zone to overlap with, being in the Netherlands. So I usually start my day a little bit later. I start around like 10 o'clock, and I also make sure to, do a lot of my like catching up on Slack, catching up on all the news that has happened since I've been offline right at the beginning of the day. Then I block off time to get things done, because a lot of my colleagues actually that I work with directly don't wake up until around 2 or 3 o'clock. So I have a bit of a block there. Now with COVID-19 and my partner working from home, I try to take my lunch hour outside, getting a bit of fresh air while we still can. So I really try to block that off too and reserve time to just unwind. But because you're working from home, it's really important as well to remember to take, get up, get a coffee, stretch your legs, take 15 minutes to read a book. It's, if you were in an office environment, you'd have more time for breaks or just chit chat with your colleagues. So really taking care of yourself on that level as well is really important, because you can literally be in front of a screen for 8 hours without even realizing that you haven't stood up. And I think this is actually a really great segue probably into Yoganika's talk, because she talks a lot about health and well-being, but it's really important to take care of yourself during this time. And I think, especially if you have kids at home or a partner or maybe someone that's that you need to look after, really prioritize that as well, and make sure you communicate that when you're offline to your colleagues, so that they're aware that you're maybe not at your desk at that specific time.
Okay. Amanda, thank you very much for answering your questions, and thank you very much for your presentation. Very insightful, and I'm already buzzing in my head about it. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.